Hi, my name is Paul Schurch and welcome to my shop. This hand skills online class is called Making a Jewelry Box, or JB101 for short. It's a compact, skill-building, step-by-step, project-oriented class designed to give you the basic knowledge necessary to build a jewelry box in your own shop. You'll need some hardwood. I have a piece of 3/4 inch by 4 inch by 75-inch long piece of cherry that I think will do well for this. A piece of 1/4 inch plywood for the floor of the box, fabric to cover it, adhesive to mount it, and screws to screw it onto the box itself. I will need a piece of contrasting hardwood for the handle and plywood scrap for the 2 jigs that we'll need for this constructing the casework, and also some hinges. I tend to like the Brusa ones, they're the best quality. As for the tools, you'll need a table saw with a sled, a bandsaw or a saber saw, a thicknesser or a jack plane to thickness material down, a biscuit joiner or a domino, or even a dowel. This would work as well. Some clamps and a few other items that you will probably already have in your shop. I always do a detailed drawing like this before attempting any woodworking project. This allows me to figure out all the problems and dimensions first before I cut a board 3 times and discover that they're still too short. The project drawing is a downloadable PDF and can be printed from your computer and enlarged to the actual size by Office Max or Staples. Here's the top, side, front, and on the side view you have some of the different profile options, joinery options, a hinge, and also some of the other dimensions that you'll find necessary to be able to complete this box. There are basically 2 different sizes which I need to cut out. For the lids or for the front and back, I need 13 1/4. And for the sides, I need 2 pieces which are going to be 10 1/4 inches. This can be for one of the lids. I'm going to do one of the sides from here. Here we'll have a front, side, and the rest of it looks like that will work out very nicely. So now it's time to cut it off with the table saw and the sled, and that's what we'll do next. This is the material that I would like to use for my joint spacer block and also my cutting block. And the cutting block itself is going to be 3 inches, and also my joint spacer block, which is 7 3/4 inch. Now comes time to cut. So, these blocks are now done, and now I can cut the solid wood cherry to the proper length. In order to set it up, I first need to establish my point of reference, which will be a small block put here at the proper dimension of 13 1/4 inches. As I cut the pieces here, this is a long one, this 3-inch spacer block can get put in here to make the shorter 10 1/4 inches, so I'll be able to use the same stop for both. Okay, the pieces have been cut, and now it's time to mark them out for proper orientation. I also cut the spacer block here, which we'll be using for our interior joinery reference. Now I have 2 pieces which are obviously the sides, and these 4 pieces which are the lid, and there's also going to be a front and the back. I'm going to select the lid first because I see that when I approach the jewelry box, and I think that the grain orientation will be pretty important there. So in looking at the pieces here, I'm going to select a couple of pieces for the lid. I want to make sure that we have a consistent grain, but also something which is pretty important is the proper grain orientation. So if I draw a grain on here, this is where it goes here, and on this one, and I put a grain orientation here, I want to make sure that it has a consistent flow of grain pattern, or the end grain pattern, from one piece to the other. If I put it together like this, with the grain going the opposing direction, this is liable to warp with time. For the front and the back, I want to put these apart. These look fine. I can probably put this one on the left side, this one on the right side, and I have a small defect here, or a small knot that I want to put on the inside and down where it won't be able to be seen. And the front, or the front of the lid, I can put right here. Now, I use a kind of a mark to specify which piece goes where. That's easy to reestablish where they belong. And that's done by doing a small triangular mark right here that always shows me which way the box is oriented, and it will be very difficult to mix them up. Let's look at all the joinery options for this project. The Fess tool, which is my favorite, is a high-end, very precise joining tool, which makes a joint by having a drill bit which wiggles from side to side. It is very well suited for something like this because, as you see with these collapsible points here, this allows me to locate the tool exactly where it needs to be from either side, and plunging 2 dominoes, which will be very precise, very tight, and incredibly strong. You can see this one here. It's a very strong joint. The next tool that I would like to show you is the biscuit joiner. This is a Lamello, which is one of the original biscuit joiners that were made, and its ability to put different depths or different sizes of these small football-shaped pressed beech biscuits in. And what I find really advantageous about this tool is that I can locate it. You see I've clamped on a small fence to the side, and it's located exactly where it wants to be, so I can plunge it down and make a biscuit slot here, and also it will be able to make a biscuit slot in the opposing piece. These 3 biscuits, there's a number 20, a number 10, and a number 0. We'll be using the number 0. It also allows me to laterally adjust the piece so everything becomes flush and clean on the sides. The last joiner option which I'd like to show you is the dowel. Now, I'm using 3/8 dowels here, and with this little jig which I've made, this allows me to position the jig right over the hole that I needed to drill it out. And if I've clamped this fairly securely, I'm able then to drill it out using this jig as a guide. Also, it will allow me to drill from the end as well and put the dowel right where I need it. That's all for now, so find the wood you're going to use, select your tools for the joinery, and we'll see you on the next segment of Hand Skills, where we'll get to glue up the jewelry box. Welcome to the second segment of Hand Skills, building a jewelry box. Last time we cut the wood, we got all our tools together, and now it's time to join the box. I know that the inside is really my reference surface, and I really need to keep track of where that inside is, because that's where I'm going to base all my joinery off of. As you remember, the joinery block, which is 7 3/4 of an inch, will be placed right in the middle on either side. I need to do some middle marks and use the middle marks as a reference. So 7 3/4. Be able to make a line here and bring it around to the side and up to the top. I have it on this piece of plywood here because the bench is sometimes a little rough and I'll be clamping some pieces on. Also, with the clamps that I have attached here, I need to lift it off a little bit off the bench so the clamps don't interfere with my cut. Line this up right on my middle line. And now it's time for my joint. Make sure that this is quite secure. The last thing I want to do is have this shift around during the cut. The joint that I'm going to be putting in here is really exactly in the middle of this board. So this fence is established here where it is exactly 2 inches from the middle line over to the edge. So that side is done, and now this side. The last part of this joint will involve the front and the back. This is where a lot of people get confused. Again, my middle is the reference surface, so I really need to establish the reference surface. That is the same surface here that the joinery block was in. So as I plunged here using this block as a reference surface, I also need to plunge here using this as a reference surface. The joinery is now complete, and let's test assemble the case to see if it actually fits. It's nice and secure, nice and snug. If you plunge a biscuit in the wrong place, or if you misadjust it or it slips, you can always glue a small little biscuit in, cut it off flush with the surface, and re-plunge a new biscuit hole. That also works. Okay, the box is now joined together, and now comes time to do the side profile. I will be cutting the strips off the top and the bottom, but the side profile I would like to do next. The blueprint has a variety of different profiles, as you can see here. Different profiles one can use. I've used this one with a scalloped divot. I find that very attractive, and I'm also using that same scalloped divot in the handle. I've taken a photocopy of this, and I am now going to put this photocopy onto a template. The template is a piece of gray board, or what I call paper chipboard, and it needs to be adhered using spray adhesive. The template is now cut out, and now I need to transfer it onto my piece of wood. Now it comes time to cut it out. Once these pieces are cut out, it is time to shape them. And now those two edges are now complete. So at this point, I am almost ready to glue up the case, but I still need to trim off the lip and the bottom for this case on the table saw. The top will need a 3/4 inch strip, and the bottom needs to be 5/8. So it'll leave me with a 1/2 inch leftover strip, which I'll utilize for other things. And the top, I know this is the top because of the triangle here, and I want to make sure that I cut them all in sequence. And now I need to cut the small strip, the 5/8 of an inch strip, off the bottom. I am ready now to cut these into smaller strips. Here are my lids, and now the smaller strips. For this, I'll use a feather board. Now the last thing that I need to do on these front and back is to cut the groove out, which will be necessary for my floor panel to set in. 1/4-inch panel, so I want to make it a little bit more. For this process, I will need to take out the splitter so I can ride the board on top, and I'll need to set a proper depth. So that's 1/4 plus 1/16. This is the inside of the box. I'll have a groove here, and I'll also have a groove here. Good. Okay, so these are the parts that came off the table saw. I have my 2 lid pieces here, all the 4 strips, which I'll set aside for later. And now I can clean up some of the burn marks and start sanding this piece in preparation for glue up. Okay, get the other side. Make sure the grain is going the right direction. As you can see, the biscuit is very close to the ends, but it doesn't protrude past the ends. That's why I use number 0. And now I think I'm ready to sand the insides, and I can use a cabinet scraper. To get rid of the planing marks or any surface defects. I'm always doing the insides. Now I'm also doing on these front and back, because there's an overhanging lip on the sides, because of that overhanging lip, it's going to be very hard for me to get to the insides here, where this comes together. You notice that I will not be able to really get the insides here, so I'm actually going to finish sand and surface everything except the outside of the side. I'm now ready for dry fitting. We have these pieces and these. These marks are a little faint, so I'm going to put them back on. I also have a couple of spacers which I've cut that are 5/8 of an inch space. Since these lamellos allow, or these biscuit joints, allow sort of a lateral movement of a joint, I want to be able to space them properly on these little sticks. These are standoffs. Looks good. All right, so dry fit also includes clamps. So what I'm checking for is that all the joints do seat up tight from the inside and out, which they appear to do. I want to check my reveals and my standoffs. Everything seems to be fine. Now it's time to go to glue up. With this glue, you have a fairly short open time. Maybe in 10 minutes, I really have to have this case work together. If you need more time, you can use this lower setting glue, but this one should be fine for this process. I always put glue inside the joint, but never on the biscuit itself, because the biscuits are pressed beechwood, and when they hit the moisture, they will expand, and it will be very, very tough to get them in. These small divider sticks will tell me at least a crosswise dimension, whether it is, and right now, which is pretty miraculous, this rarely happens, that this is perfectly square at this moment. If this case is out of alignment, if it's a parallelogram such as like this, what I would need to do is put clamp pressure on the opposing corners to bring it back into alignment. The way I do that is I can just tap it with a mallet a little bit, tighten it down, and tap it down here, tighten it down, and I've effectively pushed this case over this way. All the joints appear to be tight. Now it's time for cleanup. So I can also take these sticks here to get into the corners and make sure that I have everything nice and wet. I'm not worried about watermarks. One of the things that I usually say is, how do you prevent water spotting? Well, the way to prevent water spotting is to wet everything. Okay, the lid is also now ready to glue up. While I have the glue brush wet, might as well do it. Now remember that the grain direction, when I have right here the 2 pieces that they're matched visually, they match pretty well. I made these marks earlier. The grain is continuous from one board to the next. This lid will be surfaced down to 1/2 inch. I do want to make sure that I am lined up on the ends because I don't have a whole lot of spare. These are the same size as the front and the back. The lid will be cut slightly to act as a reveal, so it passes within the box. I'm maybe taking off 1/16 of an inch, and the lid will also need to be trimmed down ever so slightly, so I'm not worried about clamping marks on the edge. At this point, I can take a small bit of a rag to clean off the glue. I'm not worried about sizing the whole panel because it will be thickness down, and I can set this aside until it dries. Okay, so now it's time to unclamp the box. It appears that the joints are all nice and tight. There's no glue left over. And I've already sanded the insides of the box. The wetting of the grain has made the hair stand up just a little bit, but now it's time to sand the rest of the box. Start off with 100 grit, 120, 180, 220. I wouldn't go much past 220. These are the strips that I cut earlier. These are all now sanded and ready to glue in. I've also trimmed them down to a 7 3/4 inch length. There will be 2 strips that will go in both the top and the bottom, right here. This one will go in right here. And one of them, the one on the bottom here, this is for floor stop, so I can screw my floor into this strip here. So gluing it up is a relatively easy process of just applying glue. Generally, I'll probably do it only on one surface and put it in. And clamping it in won't need a whole lot of pressure here. You can use a spring clamp, adjustable C-clamp, Irwin clamps, it all works. Afterwards, it does need to be cleaned up on the inside and outside, any kind of a glue line. The outside glue line will be easier to remove afterwards, but the inside is something that I want to catch now. And a little bit of cleanup on the inside down here where one would be able to see it. And I'll repeat this for the other side. Now that the stops have been glued in, the next time we meet, we'll be making a knob, gluing the fabric onto the floor, hinging the lid, and finishing this jewelry box. Welcome to the 3rd class of this series on making a jewelry box. The lid has now been glued, and it looks like it should be dry. Yep. And it is time to thickness it down to the proper thickness, which will be 1/2 inch. So doing this by hand would involve a bench and a good scrub plane or a good jack plane. And one can start working it down. Now I can keep on working at this for a little while, but you know, if I have a thicknesser, I would actually prefer to use that. Now that the lid is thicknessed down to the proper thickness, which is 1/2 inch, it is time to glue on those strips that we cut off very early in the process. They'll go right here in the middle, and I can always sand this later because there's no real captured grain. I don't have edges on the end grain, it's only on the side, so it'll be relatively easy for me to sand after these are glued up. Now, I have already trimmed this lid down, as you know, and so it should be at the proper thickness. Now, one way of being able to set this together, what I use a lot is I use these bricks to kind of hold or stabilize things so I can at least get the first clamp on. There we go. That looks good. Now it's ready for me to put the first clamp on. Okay. Now the one on the other side. Adjust this over a little bit. Need to get the same reveal, both sides. That looks good. just allowed enough room that if I need to adjust it for any wind or any warp, I have a little bit to plane off of here where it sits onto the casework. Okay. In preparation for finishing this lid, there's a number of things that I could do to it. It's a solid wood lid, so I could do a bas-relief or some kind of carving on it. I could do some kind of an inlay, or I can decorate it with banding. There's many different things that I could do with it. This is just a simple lid, but like in the third class of this series, or the final class of this series on doing a marquetry medallion, that would be a place to insert some kind of an inlay. I really want to get rid of all the glue that I can on the surface, because if any remains on the surface, then it will show up, or it potentially shows up in the finishing. It won't absorb the finish in the same way because there's glue which is actually sealing the wood fibers. Okay. So I'm going to be trimming the floor to fit into the box and the lid to fit on the other side. Good. The lid now has about a 1/16 of an inch gap, which I'll distribute in the middle. That'll be 1/32 of an inch clearance on either side. And it looks like I'm ready for final sanding and hinging the lid. Okay, the floor has now been cut to size, and I have pre-drilled some screw holes. Now it's time to drill. Okay, the lid is now completely cut, so it passes within the framework. The edges have been sanded, and I want to make sure that I get rid of all the saw marks here. That might take a lot of extra sanding to get rid of those saw marks, but now when they're all finished, or when they're all finished sanded, and all the edges and everything detailed out, it should look really nice. So that's all for now. Next time we meet, we'll be hinging the lid, gluing fabric onto the floor, making the knob out of that little piece of walnut, and starting our final finish for this jewelry box. Welcome to this fourth and final class of hand skills building a jewelry box. I've trimmed the lid down, and now it's time to hinge it. It has a clearance on it, which is about a veneer thickness clearance on either side. So I'm going to put some veneer shims in here to lock it securely in place. So I'm going to put the jewelry box up on edge here, maybe secure it. I'm going to do my initial mark. Let's see, let's get this shim in. Okay. My initial mark at 2 inches. On either side. And give myself a nice reference line. The hinges that I'm going to use are Brousseau hinges, and they're stopped hinges. In other words, they only open up so far, and it will not open up all the way, so you don't need a chain stay or any other kind of way of securing the lid from going back too far. So these hinges here, I'll need to do a width. make a good mark here. And now it is time to chisel these hinges in, or mortise them in. What I'm going to do is mark the hinge, how far back it needs to be. And on this, the full barrel needs to be exposed onto the back. And if I can line it up and I can kind of sight the hinge over the indents and over either edges, I can actually do a line here with a sharp pencil. And I will be cutting inside of this line. I will also do this to the other side, where I'll be making a mark here on this side and on this side, and now then I can start chiseling it in. So I'm almost done hinging this lid here. Okay, looks like it'll go in. It's nice and flush. Now I'll have to do this to all the sides, and then I can do a trial fit. Okay, all the mortising is done. I'm hoping the lid will fit. You know, it takes some precision to line up everything, and it doesn't always work out how you expect. There's always usually some adjustment or something that needs to happen. Okay, the moment has arrived. It's a little tight on this corner, a little loose on this corner, so it will need to be bumped ahead just a very slight bit, but those are all minor adjustments. Now it's time to finish the floor up. I'm ready to glue the fabric onto the floor, and in this instance I've found some very nice shimmery purple velvet. I think that'll look really nice, and it has these small hairs that stand up on the fabric, so it's easier to grab your jewelry. So the secret for gluing fabric on a foundation is that you want to stretch it out nicely so there's no wrinkles and it's not pulled in any direction, and that it's completely at its relaxed state, whatever the shape of the piece might be. Now there will be a need to put spray adhesive on the back of the board. So the reason that I turned this can upside down to clear the nozzle is so it works next time. Otherwise the adhesive clogs the nozzle. Okay, I'm ready to trim this off. I'm using an X-Acto knife or a scalpel and keeping it low. I can trim it down. It's not so important that this edge is perfectly clean because it's trapped inside the rabbet. So you always find maybe a little bit of fuzz, something around the perimeter. And now it's ready to drop into the box, which has been pre-drilled. There it goes. It appears like it fits. Okay, time for the knob. So you can see by my sketch on the blueprint what the knob is that I think would look nice, but it's going to be kind of a hand shape anyway. Now I'm going to cut this out on the bandsaw and shape the rest of it. right, I think that the knob looks pretty much done. I have a slight slope or a taper here. It's all nicely sanded. And I want to make sure that I have the middle of the box, 15 inches overall, which makes 7.5. And the knob itself is 2.5 inches, so I'm going to put that at 1.25. And now I'm going to glue it onto the center of the box, and that should be it for now. So, fillets on the bottom. So this box is now done. I finished this box using a variety of things that I have here on the bench. I wanted to bring out the luster of the and the color of the cherry, and to deepen the color, I wanted to use some kind of an oil, but I didn't want to take the time to go through the several coats of oil that it needed. And so I put a coat of tung oil finish. This product from Wind & Wax it says it's a tung oil finish. Most likely it's not tung oil, it's maybe linseed oil, a bit of tung, and some dryers and other solvents to make it harden. But I put a layer of this, let it sit overnight, cleaned it off with steel wool, and then I put a layer of thin down shellac to seal the oil in. After that, I could apply any finish that I would like. I could do a water base finish, I could do a lacquer, I could do conversion varnish. But the easiest thing I found was to put maybe 2 or 3 coats of clear wood finish from Deft, and between each coat I'll buff it down with 4/0 steel wool, cleaning with steel wool, and then putting another coat on. After that, Blue Label paste wax or some kind of good paste wax, and this box is then done. This concludes the 4th and final segment of this Hand Skills online program for building a jewelry box. I hope that you've learned useful techniques that will help you develop as a woodworker, and you get to use this knowledge on your next woodworking project. When you finish your box, send us a photo of your work, and we'll post it with your permission, of course. The next title of this 3-class series is called Veneering 101, where we'll make a simple book-match veneer panel to use in this box or in a cabinet or a table. Then finally, the last class is called Marquetry 101, which is the last class of this series. Here I show the simplest way of making a traditional floral marquetry pattern, and it can even be mounted or inlaid into a wood surface like this jewelry box. It could be used in a cabinet door or even a chair back. Both classes come with an optional kit that has tools and supplies that you can use to do this work. And I wish to thank all of the supporters and the encouragement from others that have made this class possible. And above all else, have fun woodworking.